This is a brief review of Pathwork Lecture 155, which is entitled Fear of Self, and also discusses giving and receiving. So what the guide says in the lecture is that all fears lead back to fear of self. My practice when reading a Pathwork lecture is to take a statement like that, which there's no wiggle room in that. It doesn't say might be, maybe, most of the time. It says all fears lead back to fear of self, is to experiment and explore. And the guide supports this. He says, don't just take this for granted. Don't just take this as truth. It is only truth if you find it to be true. So I think in terms of, what about this fear? What about that fear? How does that come back to me? I answer those questions to my satisfaction. I invite you to take that statement and answer it to your satisfaction. The lecture also speaks of fear prohibiting spontaneity. If you're frightened of who you are, how can you let the gates open? How can you become open to experiences, exchange, intimacy, if you think that something terrible is going to leak out of you? So embedded in fear of self is obviously a false belief that at essence there's something wrong with us. And while Pathwork teaches and teaches that there is nothing inherently wrong with us, it is a common human experience to believe that. So perhaps it would be useful to talk about that discrepancy. In the Pathwork cosmology, meaning how it describes the process to happen, the lectures describe that human beings come to the planet. They take on a human incarnation with the positive intent of healing, learning, growing. Well, if you're healing, learning, and growing, you've brought something that needs to be transformed. You've brought something that needs to be educated. You've brought something that you need to not be attached to, something to let go of. This is the Pathwork explanation of original sin. The word original sin is unfortunate, or the phrase is unfortunate, but this is the mirror of what many philosophies and religions hold as original sin. Yes, there is something that needs to be healed, transformed, purified. Fear of self is a way of blocking that process, because if you're afraid to see it, you won't be able to heal it. So again, fear of self prohibits spontaneity. We can't open ourselves, we can't receive, we can't give, because we're afraid that something will pop out. And this is not just philosophy or religious. This goes all the way back to any archetype, any archetypical story that you hear in cultures. The one that I am most familiar with is Pandora's box. And the Greek myth of Pandora, it could be Roman, not quite sure, I get those mixed up. But the myth from those ancient times of Western civilization is that there was a chest that contained all the evils in the world, but Pandora was prompted to open it to see what they were. And so she opens the chest, and all the winged, stinging insects, all the diseases, all the plagues of mankind escape from the chest. And Pandora, too late, closes it. And then she hears a knock on the inside of the box, and a little voice says, "Let me out, let me out." And she says, "Oh no, I saw what's in that box, I cannot let you out." And in the story, the voice says, "But I am hope." And so Pandora opens the box, the trunk, and this is the archetypical story of how hope entered the world. And hope is a counter effect to the vicissitudes, the trials, the tribulations of life. In studies such as pathwork, it is our positive intent to transform that makes our issues, our deficiencies, our flaws of character tolerable. We have brought these in order to learn more about them. And therefore, opening our hearts, opening this trunk that seems to be holding terrible things, is the way we will learn. Number one, they're not that terrible. Number two, yes, perhaps they are, and also contained within us is our divine self, our positive intent to heal, which will make quick work of these things if we would just let it out. So the pathwork process is about finding all kinds of different reasons why we withhold our real self and being an encouragement to explore opening ourselves. Of course, first in safe places, with the goal of being able to open ourselves whenever we are in an appropriate setting for doing so. One of the ways to prove that you should be afraid of yourself is to expose yourself in unsafe environments. And then you can say, you see, it didn't work. People laughed at me, they mocked me, I got fired. But that is a misuse of the concept. If there is a part of you that does not behave well, that is immature, we need to find a safe place to open to that reality and explore that reality differently from a situation where we would be attacked for it. So it is our job to find safe places for self-exploration. Of course, one of the safest places for self-exploration is within ourselves. So a lot of the pathwork materials are about self-analysis, self-examination, as a prelude to then finding places where we can discuss our own issues, hear the issues of others, and come to a place where we understand not everybody is perfect, we are not perfect, and. So fear prohibits spontaneity. It constricts the natural soul movements. So you can't open, and you become tense about anything that would relax you and allow this opening to happen. And of course, all that prevents the real self from manifesting. Real self is a term Patrick uses for the larger aspect of who you are. In spirit, your real self is bigger than your human form. The guide emphasizes that awareness of all this is a substantial step. And I consistently use lecture 127 to discuss this, or to illustrate this. So in Patrick lecture 127, the first stage of spiritual evolution is unfortunately being unconscious of what's going on. That's the first stage. That's where it begins. Then awareness happens. And awareness is a substantial step. We poo-poo it because awareness alone does not change things. We need understanding, and we need to go back and forth. So as we unearth, as awareness comes to us, we take understanding and we become more understanding and aware of what is going on. So that at some point we drop through to a knowing, which means I understand. I understand the cause and effect, I understand the dynamics, and I understand how I get seduced into a belief that is untrue, that does not serve me. Fear of self, and fears of all kind lead to a reliance on outer values. And a few months ago, we studied Patrick Lecture 64, which is about inner and outer will. So if I am afraid of me, I can't lead, I can't make decisions. I need to look elsewhere for decisions, for leadership, to substitute for the assumption that my being is flawed. and cannot be put in charge of anything. The lecture says you can only become alive to the degree you overcome the fear of self. And so what that's about is, if you can't be spontaneous, if you can't allow natural soul movements to occur, if you can't allow your real self to manifest, then you're not really alive. You, the essence of you, is not truly participating in life. It's tucked away, hidden away, because of its so-called imperfections. Fear of self also leads to a fear of pleasure. Why? Because pleasure opens you up. Pleasure makes you happy, makes you not as careful. It spurs spontaneity. It spurs connection and intimacy. And all these things will get you in trouble. Again, we're continually going back to, because I'm afraid of what will come out. I'm afraid of what people will see and find. I'm afraid of what I will express, so I won't express anything. And so fear of self leads to fear of pleasure. Fear of self also leads to poverty consciousness. So this is a vicious circle. And that is, I must hold myself tightly so that I do not reveal myself. And therefore I do not experience pleasure. And I become hungry for pleasure. I become desirous of pleasure. So I leap out of myself one day and, of course, misbehave, because it's a leap. It's a forcing current. I grab life. And so I don't do it in a relaxed, mature fashion. I'm grabbing it, which can make other people reject me, which becomes a vicious circle. Now, the one story that I thought of to illustrate this is when my grandmother died back in the 50s. Her daughters went through her bureau drawers as they were cleaning out her personal things. And they found a large number of tablecloths, pillowcases, slips, that she would wear slips under her clothing, and lingerie items that they had bought her for Christmas and birthday presents. A very large number of things that had never been worn, never been opened. I don't know my grandmother. She died when I was just a few years old, so I don't know why. But what I'm going to suggest is, a lot of times that refusing to enjoy the pleasure of life is due to a rationalization, a justification. I won't wear them, somebody else can wear them. Why would you say that, except that you weren't sure you had the right to the pleasure of wearing soft and pretty things? Or you don't wear them because if I wear soft and pretty things, I might act in a certain way, and I don't want to act that way, so I will forego the pleasure. Understanding that these are small personal gifts intended to bring pleasure. Now, where that dovetails with the lecture is where fear of self is going to make it hard for you to give and receive. And the case with my grandmother that I'm describing is that she couldn't receive. She couldn't receive her daughter's good wishes. Now, of course, she received the energy of her daughter's good wishes, but she chose not to take the step of actually manifesting that gift, of actually taking the gift and using it in her daily life. That is also a part of receiving. The receiving isn't just a matter of making sure you say thank you and be seen as receiving the gift. Receiving the gift, if it's an appropriate gift given with love and consideration that meets your needs, receiving the gift also involves receiving the possibility of pleasure as you use the gift, wear the gift, eat the gift. And that in that energy of receiving is a lovingness. It's a form of love to receive from others. If you are afraid to expose yourself, then you cannot fully and honestly give of yourself to others. And so what we do is we substitute. We give things. We give time and energy, but not of ourselves. And it has the potential to create a vicious circle where we are giving superficialities to someone because we want to give, but because they don't contain our energy, which is what the recipient wants. They take the thing and they put it aside. And then we feel rejected because my gift got turned down. Until and unless you are truly giving of your whole self, you can't make the assumption that you were rejected. What you can say is my substitute gift was rejected. The substitute for my caring was rejected. Pathwork lectures invite us, once again, under appropriate circumstances and with some care, to consider giving more honestly of ourselves. And then taking the objective feedback, taking it in, because giving is a cooperative step, cooperative activity. That when I give, it is important to consider the feelings of the receiver. That when someone gives to me, my feelings also matter. Sometimes when someone gives to me of themselves, it's not something that I can use. It may be something that even does not fit my value system. I can still give them a heartfelt thank you. And I can try to recycle the gift or make what use of it I can, rather than think that that's going to taint or punish me, or is a challenge or a criticism of me. It is sometimes the best the other person can do. So I'm inviting you to see where this cycles back around to a fear of self. I'm afraid to admit who I am, so they don't know. Since they don't know, they can't give to my real self, so they're giving to my substitute self, my mask, my facade. Now, the last section of this lecture is rather confrontive. And there are times when I read phrases in the lectures where I think, how else can I explain this to someone? Because this is a little grim. This is a bit challenging. So I'm going to do my best here to not offend. The guide talks about overemphasizing past experiences. And in this paragraph, he says that sometimes we become an entire generation of self-pitying people who say, I am crippled because I was not given to when I was a child. And I believe that he is using harsh language like that to try to shock us out of the absurdity of saying, because my mother was not a big enough person, I can't become a big person. Keep in mind that it is important to have a model of what a human being can be, and the better our models, the more easily we can learn and instruct ourselves and put that to work. That is very true. Not having a good model can also be instructive. It can also be a teaching opportunity for ourselves. We can come to the conclusion, I still value kindness. I did not receive it. So without a model, I'm going to have to construct an ability. I'm going to have to find and develop skills so that I can be the kind of person I want to be. What I'm trying to describe here is sometimes when we get something, we don't value it until later in our life, and then we value it enormously. That's usually because we've lost it along the way, and then we refind it. What I am suggesting is sometimes we're not given it in the first place, and that causes great pain and great suffering. And we have the capacity to decide, I am suffering because I was not given something. Therefore, I will have to give it to myself. In order to believe that you can give it to yourself, you need to not be afraid of yourself. When you become your own parent, when you become your own teacher of life, you need all your resources, all your soul movements. You need spontaneity to help you grow. And you certainly need to be willing and able to receive the pleasure of life, because that is sometimes feedback. It tells you you're doing things right. If you reject pleasure, where's your feedback when you do things well? So it's a small description of how all these aspects of life are connected to being afraid of the self. So, short summary of Pathwork Lecture 155, Fear of Self. Thank you for listening. There are study guides on my websites, janrigsby.org and janrigsby.com. And the lecture can be downloaded from the main site for the International Pathwork Foundation, pathwork.org. Thanks again for listening.